is not. Oh, we are live. Hey, this is Greg Siskind. Thanks for joining us for our weekly live stream. Even though last week we weren't here, there was a good reason. It involved a surprise party that I couldn't tell somebody that was supposed to be that I was hosting that I wasn't going to be able to be on, and there were other conflicts. Anyway, we're back. There's plenty of news this week. Last week was actually kind of like a slower week. As far as things to talk about. But I'm joined this week by Jeanne Santos and Robby Rubin, who are two lawyers at Siskind Susser. And we're going to cover quite a bit of immigration news for the week. I have 10 things on the list. I usually only have 5 things. This week I have 10 things. And you may notice I'm wearing like a suit jacket. My tie is not on. I had to get a tie on earlier today. I was in Nashville, which is a good 200 miles away from here, this morning at the state legislature in Nashville. And believe it or not, immigration law is affected by things that happen in state legislatures and not just in Congress, and sometimes very significant ways. Things that happen in state legislatures. So our state, we have something going on, and our state is Tennessee. In our state legislature has passed a bunch of anti-immigration measures, but this latest one is a little bit different because there are some legislators that are trying to pass a law that they know is unconstitutional, with the hope that they can get this case appealed up to the U.S. Supreme Court and get the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse a 40-year-old case and reverse the longstanding U.S. policy. And I'm talking about a case called Plyler v. Doe, and it was from the early 1980s. And it basically, the Supreme Court at that time said that a public school education, at least K through 12, was a right for every child in the United States, and you couldn't be barred from going to school because of your immigration status. And that has been the law of the land for 4 decades, and it was pretty much the law of the land before that, but this enshrined it. That's was one that I guess we knew and maybe on the radar for things that they might try and push. But that is something that now there's 4 different bills in our state legislature, which I'll handle it somewhat differently. So I was up there with my friend Brittany Faith, who's an immigration lawyer in Chattanooga on the other end of the state, and a couple other lawyers and a couple other folks, advocates, to talk to some legislators about sort of real world implications of this. And one of the things we talked about, for example, was it's not always so. If school districts start trying to verify the immigration status of kids on there, it's not always so easy to figure out. First of all, try getting, especially in rural school districts and places where you have uneducated parents, lots of places where kids are sort of in tricky situations. Getting that documentation into the schools to verify that they're U.S. citizens is not necessarily as easy as you think. And the schools themselves may be seeing kids that are out of school for significant periods of time while they're waiting on that. That's just the kids who actually have U.S. birth certificates. And then you have groups that are also legally here and may even be U.S. citizens. So you might have U.S. citizens, kids who are citizens because their parents naturalized. When your parents naturalize before you're 18 years old, if you've been here for at least 5 years with your parents, you don't go through the naturalization ceremony yourself. You don't get a naturalization certificate. You're just automatically a citizen when your parents become citizens. But you don't have any proof of that. You have to apply for a passport, or you have to file what's called an N-600 application. That's for a certificate of citizenship. And Jeanne, you probably file some of those, but I looked it up earlier today just for our state, Memphis, which is where you would file. It's 6 months to get that document from USCIS. So if you're a kid in that situation, you're going to basically be missing, most of a school year waiting on that document to come from USCIS, even though you're as much a citizen as the kid who was born, across the street from the school on there. And we talked to some legislators about that issue, and I don't know. I mean, we're in a state in our state right now where it seems like there's kind of a frenzy to pass anything they can that is mean to immigrants. And I also, talking to a conservative legislator who's one of the people that were working on this bill, I reminded them that there were some pretty important people in that, in the Republican Party that they they were asking questions about, like, well, why should we educate them if they're not going to have the ability to work when they're done with school? Like, what's the purpose of like spending all this money in it on educating them if they basically have to go sit on a couch? And I said, well, a lot of times people, first of all, there are a lot of people's status can get fixed, and people find all kinds of pathways. That's what immigration lawyers do, is they talk to people and we find pathways, and sometimes it takes several years, and sometimes it's faster than that, but there's oftentimes pathways. And we had a young woman with us who was somebody who was undocumented, and she got into the DACA program, and then she was able to get a bachelor's degree, graduate high school, get a bachelor's degree, and she got left and came back in on advanced parole. And then she was able to get an H-1B visa, and then she got a green card, and then she got citizenship on there. And that it was a great person to have with us, because it sort of like basically flew right in the face of that perception, which is that once you're out of status, you're always going to be out of status, and there's no way you're going to fix it. I also reminded them that Elon Musk, Melania Trump, and Arnold Schwarzenegger had all been illegally president in the United States at one point. So they were all illegal aliens, and all have gone on to great success in their various fields. So that's these are people that if you basically said no forgiveness on there and take away all access to the benefits of the country, we wouldn't have Teslas, we wouldn't have Baron Trump, and we wouldn't have the Terminator on there. So anyway, so that's what I did today. I encourage you, that are watching, to get active in advocacy on immigration. It does matter. Sometimes, people need to hear from those that are actually affected by immigration policies. You make it real for them, and once it's real, it's harder for them to basically do some of the things that they're doing. So anyway, that's what I did. All right, well, let's get on to some of the issues for this week. And boy, there have been a lot of crazy stories in the news for the last couple of days about removals and people being turned away at the border. We already have our first question from Orlando Love, and he asked, are green card holders being targeted on entry at U.S.? Is travel risky? And we're going to get a little bit more into travel later, but the answer on it is, I'd love to say, that it's all overblown and don't worry about it, but I don't know on there. I mean, it seems like there's some randomness to who's getting in trouble. Some of it's predictable, some of it's less predictable. There were a number of cases, though, and I can tell you what is predictable, and that is that those who have taken political positions loudly, are seem like they're being targeted. Most of you probably have seen in the news about the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University student protest leader, green card holder, and arrested. And I guess they shipped him down to Louisiana on there. Although I think a judge has ordered him back to New Jersey, to the detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey. But he's being held based on not on specific criminal charges, but based on sympathy for Hamas, which is I guess support. I guess it's material support. I mean, it's supporting a terrorist group, I guess, is the ground on there. Usually, I've seen that used in like refugee situations or other situations where people have given like financial support to organizations that are deemed terrorist organizations, as opposed to merely, saying things that are there. And I'm not even sure that it was directly saying anything supporting Hamas versus indirectly supporting policies that seem to benefit Hamas. But we don't know because we're not hearing anything. And he's not being given any due process. So that was one case. There was another case of a Brown University professor, a professor of medicine, who was denied entry coming into the U.S., who apparently she has an H-1B visa, the Brown professor. She was denied entry. Apparently her phone was taken, and they found photos on her phone of her attending a funeral of not Hamas, a Hezbollah leader in Lebanon, which, that's not a great thing to have on your phone when you're going through CBP. But it was also I think there were probably like tens of thousands of people that were marching in that. And she had said that it was, she's a Shiite Muslim, and it was sort of a religious thing. Anyway, the point on it was that that she was bounced on that issue. But there are also some that were sort of like a little less obvious on there. So there was a case in California this week of a Canadian woman who was coming into the United States trying to set up a business on a TN visa. She was arrested, taken away in chains, and put in detention. And no reason was offered for why she wasn't, except they said that that they thought that she was coming in with fraudulent intentions and was not, I guess, not going to be doing what she was saying. But the normal course of things is you put a person back on an airplane and you ship them home on here. You don't take them away in chains and put them in detention for weeks on end. And this is like the third or fourth one to make the news of that situation. The first one I had heard about a couple of weeks ago was a German tourist, a woman who apparently had a lot of tattoos, which bothered CBP. And she was put in detention, was there several weeks in detention. She came on visa waiver as a tourist on there and ended up in detention. There was somebody from the UK, another woman, a very similar situation. And then this week there was news about a fellow from, I think he was from the Boston area, a U.S. citizen, no, not excuse me, a permanent resident from Germany who had, I think had the story was he had a marijuana arrest, which was apparently dismissed, but he ended up in somehow in the system as being that he may have missed a hearing. Anyway, the whole point on was this poor schnook was basically denied his medications. He was stripped. He was forced to take cold showers. They were like interviewing him naked on air, like he was like in Guantanamo, all over a 10-year-old, marijuana conviction or marijuana arrest. I don't know, it's conviction or arrest for something that's not even a crime anymore in his state. And that's another one and the guy gave up his green card like pretty quickly, and they still put him through that, and he's still in detention on there. So that, if they wanted to, they could have turned that person around and sent him back to Germany, and instead he's arrested. So I'm pointing out all these are individual cases. Obviously, there are thousands and thousands of people who enter the U.S. Every day. There's like I forget how many. There's like 20 million entries a year. So we don't know how common this is, but makes you, somewhat concerned. And it is, I know that we have, that we have been at the firm, I've been warning people about it. And I know Elisa Taub, one of our partners, has been on this live stream before. She posted something on LinkedIn, but I think that we've been sending out, I don't know if we've sent out a client alert. I don't know if Robby or Jeanne, if you want to talk about sort of what our advice is on travel these days.
Sure, I can kind of talk about that a little bit. I mean, basically, first of all, there is some news circulating that there's a pending travel ban that's going to affect some.
I didn't even have that on the list because it hasn't happened yet, but I'm glad you mentioned it.
Just as a context of like kind of what we really are expecting in the coming days, probably. There's a draft out there of, could affect 40 plus countries, people from 40 plus countries. And, you can see a little bit of the news, and as Greg said, we can cover that when it actually comes out, when we have more information, but that is sort of the backdrop, along with all these news stories, right? So, unfortunately, that kind of puts us in a situation of basically having to recommend that people who are here, especially if you're, of a country where on the draft list, you might want to especially have your antenna up, but, really kind of recommending not to travel, postpone any travel, if you can, right? So we're talking about people who are in the U.S., for example, on non-immigrant visas like H-1B, O-1, L-1s, right? And even from, we're talking what Greg was mentioning, people from Germany, people from Canada, right? So if you can postpone travel, better to do so, especially if you obviously will need to come back without delay and continue your life and your work, et cetera. And that includes green card holders, I would say, as well, especially right now as we're sort of waiting for news of a travel ban, and you just don't really know the context, the breadth of what the travel ban will be and how,
By the way, last time the travel bans exempted permanent residents. This time we've heard that may not be the case.
Yeah. So, so that's unfortunately kind of where we're at, is like at this moment, if you can possibly not travel internationally, better to not to, right? If you are going to travel, be mindful of photos on your phone, be mindful of social media posts on your phone, even things that inadvertently aren't pictures you took, but maybe you have an app that whenever you click on something that other people share within a group chat, and all of a sudden it downloads to your phone, obviously that can be interpreted, negatively. So you want to avoid that. So, just as a general rule, even if you're in the middle of, about to apply for immigration processes, kind of mentioned this one of the last times on these live streams, is, kind of vet and curate your own social media accounts, and, see if you can remove anything that might be construed as controversial, which, exactly what that means, we're not sure. But I would probably err on the side of lots of things are controversial, could be controversial.
So immigration lawyers watching this know Ari Sauer sometimes is on this live stream. He and I write a book called the AILA Practice and Procedures Manual, which everybody calls the cookbook. Today I was finishing the update for the book's coming out again in June for the first time in 2 years, and I was updating the consular processing chapter, which I just finished today. And there were various things that I've been incorporating in, but all kinds of reasons why you should be really thinking about some of the changes that are happening if you are needing consular processing. And one of the things I talked about was in the last edition, came out in 2023, and at that time there was the section I was ending saying there were all these changes that happened in the Trump administration, and the Biden administration was slowly, post-COVID, post-Trump, was instituting all these things to try, and they were trying to get back to normal processing at consulates, particularly for non-immigrant visas. And that included things like non-immigrant waivers. I mean, waivers of non-immigrant interviews was one example that they had, and there were other things as well. Also, stateside visa processing, which was available for a couple of months last year in a pilot program. And so I was talking about those things, but as far as the updating goes, the big caution I was putting in there was, we've seen reports now that personnel cuts are happening at consulates. That there have been, as happened in the first Trump administration, there has been a exodus of consular officers. We expected that that people just didn't want to work for this administration, so they were leaving, and also firing of local hires. And as I've mentioned in the past on this live stream, there are a lot of foreign nationals who work in U.S. consulates doing administrative functions to assist the consulate in going through all its thing, handling passports, setting appointments. There's a million different things that these folks deal with, collecting fees on there, and that there had been an order to cut 10% of that staff internationally. That's a huge amount of people that are suddenly being taken out, and so there are a lot of reasons to believe, even if Trump doesn't announce any changes to consular processing, that we would expect to see a lot of changes. We have actually seen one change on the visa, the interview waiver policy, where recently under the Biden administration, you could have you could have an interview waived if it had been less than 4 years since your previous visa stamp. Now it can only be you have to have had that stamp within the past year, which is going to eliminate a pretty good chunk of people that might have been eligible for interview waiver. So that's another thing that we're expecting to dramatically, expand the number of people that are having to get interviews at consulates with fewer officers and fewer support. So you can kind of see where that's going, which is just everything is going to be longer and longer. So at a minimum, if you need a new visa stamp, you need to be thinking long and hard about whether you want to travel, because you could be out for quite a while waiting on that visa stamp, unless you already know that you're going to have the interview waived. So that's those are headaches that also for traveling that you have to consider if you have to travel and you have to get a new visa to come back in. You better make plans for potentially long delays, and that's unfortunate that but this is what we saw in the first Trump administration. So this is not new stuff. We've dealt with that last time. It's hopefully. I feel like sometimes it's like it's not going to get that problem's not going to get solved until it becomes a problem for Tesla and SpaceX on there. It seems like that's basically the main reason why they're probably not messing around too much with H-1B policy yet, for example, as far as some of the changes that we would potentially expect to see. So thank you, Jeannie, for talking a little bit about travel on here. I think the long and short of it is that you need to be cautious about travel. If you have to travel and it's emergency, think about those factors. Am I from a country that's likely to be, and the travel ban? I posted on my LinkedIn feed the screenshot from the New York Times of the countries that are affected on there, and it looks like I think there were some interesting ones on there too. Russia, Belarus. I thought that Trump was friends with those guys on there, but they're on the list. Pakistan was the big one that's on the list in terms of a lot of people that are on visas in the U.S. That's one of the biggest suppliers of doctors to the United States is Pakistan. So look on that list and obviously be prepared. All right, let's move on to some other things. So this week in immigration news, another big thing that was happening was this case involving the Alien Enemies Act. Most of you have never heard of the Alien Enemies Act. Most Americans have never heard of the Alien Enemies Act. Most immigration lawyers have never heard of the Alien Enemies Act because it's never been a thing in our careers. And I've been doing this 35 years. I can't remember anybody in 35 years that was ever removed from the United States under the Alien Enemies Act. And there's a reason for that. That is only supposed to be used in active war situation. So, maybe it would have been the case for countries that we had gone to war against in the Gulf War or in the Second Gulf War. But that's not how President Trump was using it this week. He has declared a invasion of the United States by immigrants, and that we are at war with this invasion of immigrants that includes immigrant gang members. And he wants to use the Alien Enemies Act, which allows a president to sort of remove without a whole lot of process somebody from the United States if they are from the enemy on there. And by the way, the last time it was used in any serious way in the United States was during World War II, and that was the basis for putting Japanese Americans in internment camps on there. That was the last time the Alien Enemies Act was used in any kind of significant way. I think there may be maybe 2 or 3 individuals, in the last several decades that have ever been subject to it. But the Alien Enemies Act is, was being invoked to remove a bunch of people that were accused of being Venezuelan gang members, and they were the ACLU sued to block the deportation of several of these people. And Judge Boasberg, who, by the way, was the judge, Jeanne, in Milligan. I think he was the judge in the Milligan v. case. So he was the judge he wrote a very he wrote an opinion. We won that case with Judge Boasberg, but he wrote an opinion that cited Shakespeare and a few other things, and it was really kind of cool to read that opinion. He's a very smart guy. He's a Yale lawyer, and he is he's been on the bench a long time, and he's the senior judge for the District Court of DC, which is considered to be, one of the Circuit Court for the DC and the District Court for DC are basically like the 2 most important courts below the Supreme Court on there, and it has been basically sort of track people into Supreme Court justice positions from there. But anyway, Judge Boasberg is the one who's been hearing this case, and really sort of so Judge Boasberg orders this an immediate stop, saying this is none of this rings true as far as the ability to use the Alien Enemies Act in this way. So he orders the government to stop the deportation under that order, and then suddenly there's tweets coming from El Salvador from the president there saying, oopsie, they're all in Supermax, which is this new high security prison in El Salvador, and the Trump administration is like, we're not sending these people back, and they were in the air already, and so now the whole argument, this whole question is, did they defy the judge's order on there? They were claiming that the judge. This is really where it gets into technicalities, but you have to sort of understand this does not happen in the U.S. system, where the judge gave an order from the bench verbally, and then he followed it up a couple hours later by a written order, just sort of confirming what he had said orally. And the Justice Department lawyer was like, well, you didn't put it in writing on there. And the judge got really angry and said, you can't, my orders from the bench have meaning. Are you saying that you don't have to listen when I issue an order from the bench? And the Justice Department lawyer didn't have really much to say about that, except later on he claimed that they were already in the air after it was all done. And there have been, the funny thing is about flights is there are all kinds of public resources to go out and look at and see when flights left from this airport or that airport on there. It's all public record. But the judge gave them a deadline of today to present the flight records because he wants the official records for whatever he's about to do. And apparently about 2 hours before the deadline today, the Justice Department called and said that they had, were having trouble or they needed more time. And so he gave them an extension of another day, but he said, this is all fishy on here. And So tomorrow maybe, but the judge really has to do something. If he doesn't do anything, if the judge like basically lets us slide, we're all sunk on there, because you can't, if the administration feels like they can get away with defying a judge and there aren't any consequences for it, then we're obviously going to do that over and over again. And then we have a constitutional crisis, which is when the rules in the Constitution regarding the separation of powers are being ignored, and we no longer have the rule of law in the country. So that is worrying on there. I mean, there's also the substantive issue about how you use the Alien Enemies Act, and that almost seems like a side issue compared to this bigger issue about the what's going to happen with the judge's order. Not to mention the fact that the Department of Justice lawyers are participating in this, and those lawyers are obligated by, and I posted about this also in a couple places this week on social media, that there are some pretty clear ethics rules violations with how the Justice Department lawyers are behaving in this case, how they are behaving in some of the other cases, like the birthright citizenship case. And I think some of those people are going to get bar complaints filed against them, and and that's another thing that we're going to have to see about whether that's effective or not, in terms of getting people to at least abide by their ethical obligations. All right, so Robby, let's get to something that maybe is like a little less sexy than the Alien Enemies case, but there was some news over the last week on forms. The last time we were on, we had just gotten this news that USCIS had released a bunch of forms, including some pretty important forms like the I-485 form, and they did something unprecedented. So maybe you can tell us like a little bit about what happened and what the news was since.
So yeah, they it affected a number of forms, and one of them the I-485, and also another big one was the N-400 form. So typically when USCIS makes changes to forms, they give about, typically we'll see 60 days of notice, so practitioners and applicants can have sufficient notice to make sure they're submitting the right form additions, to avoid having their applications rejected. But in this case, it was earlier this month, maybe the first week of March. There was no notice, no grace period at all was given, and people had filed forms and then found out maybe hours later that they had filed forms for adjustment of status that were going to be rejected because, through really no fault of their own, they were an outdated edition.
They were valid when they were sent.
They were valid when they were sent, right? They were valid when they were sent, and then in transit, and with again no grace period offered and no notice given by the USCIS and any of their websites, the edition became outdated.
Now, is that normal?
No, I mean, like I said, usually we get 60 days of a 60-day grace period to get current with the edition dates on these forms when they make any changes.
So what happened? So what was sort of how did that? How did the immigration bar react?
So at first, USCIS just kind of made an announcement that they were going to be rejecting these applications as filed with the wrong edition. AILA stepped in and
remind people who AILA is.
AILA is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. It's the largest association of immigration lawyers in America that just kind of represents the immigration bar nationally, and often will step in to file these types of lawsuits and other perform other acts of advocacy. And the book that you mentioned, the cookbook, is also published by AILA, so it's just a good source of information and resources. And one of their functions is that they file these lawsuits. So they filed a lawsuit on behalf of the people that had filed these forms that were going to be rejected. And in response, USCIS announced that they were going to back off of their initial claim that they were going to reject these filings, and issued a 1-month grace period for new forms that were issued in the last couple of weeks. So anybody that did make a filing and then was at the time was with the red edition date is now.
It's more than just an inconvenience for some people, because if some people have to file filing an adjustment application has to be done by a certain deadline, otherwise you might fall out of legal status.
Right. Because people could be, like in a period, there are certain situations where somebody could be in like a period of authorized stay that only lasts, a certain amount of time, with other applications pending or at the end of, a given status.
Right.
If you don't if you file the 485 application to adjust status within that period of authorized stay, then that, kind of locks you into an additional period of stay while the 485 is pending. But right. if you don't, and it gets rejected, and you make that filing and then it gets rejected, and then you try to send it back in and it's past those, usually that 180-day period of authorized stay, you're not going to be able to adjust status, because they're going to say, well, you didn't have a status, a lawful status through which to adjust from. So,
that was sort of immigration lawyers are sort of like looking at this thing. It's like all our clients are going to blame us for sending in the wrong forms. I think that was the first reaction a lot of people had on there. It's like this, massive it was inconvenient for some. It was potentially serious immigration consequences for another. So I'm sure Ayla probably heard from a lot of immigration lawyers, like, you have to fix this, please, for us, because it's we're going to get the blame for it. But happily, it got fixed. So sometimes suing is litigation works, as my friend Chuck Cook always says.
Yeah, so it looks like Ayla filed the lawsuit on March 7th, and I believe that the next day. Is that right, Greg? The next day, I think.
It was within a few hours of the suit being filed that USCIS backed down on there. So that was a good one, amongst a lot of not so good news. More not so good news. We also had the April visa bulletin that was just released a couple of days ago. And in the April visa bulletin the visa bulletin always comes out in the middle of the month prior to the month that it takes effect. So the April visa bulletin takes effect on April 1st. And so we saw in there more retrogression for China and India EB5 final action dates. This is the kind of the interesting thing is President Trump is, we talked about last time, I think, was introduced this concept of a gold card, which right now the EB5 is pretty in demand because they have backlogs that are happening in that category. Also, EB4 is unavailable for the rest of the fiscal year. And Robby, I know that affects a lot of the cases you work on. Robby is an expert on religious worker visas, and the EB4 special immigrant religious worker just got extended I didn't even have it on the list. This could have been like on the list, but this thing that they made the news for the Democrats, Senator Schumer caving in basically to allow the government to continue operating for the next 6 months. Did have provisions that allowed for the extension of 3 programs that are immigration programs. So there is actually a little news to report with that. One of which is the EB4 special immigrant category, which now expires and sunsets in September. The Conrad 30 program for doctors now goes to September. That was supposed to expire. And then also E-Verify, which a lot of people don't realize that gets extended now in these, month by month with these short-term resolutions. So that happened, but there was this, this retrogression issue. Maybe you can explain kind of like what the crisis is for churches and mosques and synagogues and Hindu temples and the rest around the country that bring in our religious workers. Why is this a problem for them?
So the problem that a lot of these religious organizations and institutions face is that when they bring in non-immigrants, they typically will bring them in on an R1. In the maximum time that you can have on an R1, you get 2.5 year stays. So, they can be consecutive. So you get basically 5 years on an R1.
Right.
Previously, that had been plenty of time to, you could even be into your second or third year of your R1 status and start, make a petition, the petition that you file to get into the EB4 visa categories, the I-360. And, you could get current well before your 5 years expire, and apply to adjust status with the EB4 visa. Now that it's not only is it not current, or not only is it not it's unavailable, but it's also become so retrogressed and so backlogged that it's become virtually impossible for anybody to, even if you entered the United States and immediately have filed the I-360 for the EB4 on day one of your R1, you almost have no chance of being able to bridge your R1 status to your religious worker green card application. You're almost gonna, right now, I think the before it became unavailable, I think the action date was in 2019. So, we're talking about 6-7 years to wait until you can file the application to adjust status.
Yeah.
So we're getting these workers now that are out of R1 time and initially believed that they had a legitimate green card path that they could connect to before running out of our time, and now they don't. So, we're trying to come up with a lot of creative solutions. I actually today filed a perm for a rabbi, which is something that I think usually we've never had to try doing before because we could rely on EB4. And I know we've explored trying to make these institutions cap exempt so that way they could pursue H-1Bs, and there's just been a lot of chaos. I don't know which politician it was, but there's been some discussion of trying to, kind of the same way if you have an approved I-140, in your green card category is not current, you can apply for extensions of your H-1B past the 6-year maximum until your category becomes current. There's been some discussion of a similar type of allowance for people on an I-360 to extend their R1 past the 5-year maximum, while they wait for the EB4 to become current. I don't think it has any legitimate legs yet. I think those are pretty early stage rumors and maybe more hopes than rumors, but that would definitely be a good fix to the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might have a shot just because it doesn't actually increase green card numbers. It also has some, you mentioned the Jewish community, but the Catholic community is actually even more dependent on religious workers than I think any others. And there was a Catholic university study in 2022, so relatively recent, where they were reporting that 1 in 4 priests are foreign in the United States right now. Most of them getting their ordination outside the United States, which means they were likely coming in on visas. And that is a lot of churches and a lot of Catholics in America that are directly impacted by that little visa bulletin number. So I would, and it's also not necessarily people who would be typically sympathetic to reforming legal immigration on there that are attendees at those churches, but hopefully they understand that it affects them just like it affects everybody else. So
interestingly, Greg, it's interesting. The Josh Hawley of Missouri.
Is he one of the co-sponsors?
Huh?
Is he a co-sponsor?
He wrote a letter to the Department of State, just describing the need to address the issue that EB4 is oversubscribed. And he writes specifically, I think he proposes, that he proposes some, the issue with the I-360 and that people are going to have to leave even though the I-360 is approved, and that the department needs to take action so that way they can bridge that gap. So it's interesting. I mean, because it's a religious based visa and visa category, I guess there's more hope that there can be some bipartisan agreement on finding some fix, some solution to, because like you mentioned, Catholic and Christian, institutions are going to be losing large swaths of religious workers if there's nothing.
It's definitely become a big problem. I'm going to go rapidly through a couple of just other little things that some of them big, and then we'll get to the questions. But I did want to mention them. Birthright citizenship. I know a lot of people that are listening care about that issue, particularly this whole idea of not. So the Trump administration issued an executive order saying that people that are undocumented, their children will not be U.S. citizens if they're born in the U.S. and also children of non-immigrants, like an H4 a child that's born in the U.S. of H-1B parents, for example, would not be a citizen at birth, basically stateless in some cases. On there, that is that got quickly enjoined in 4 different lawsuits filed across the country. The Trump administration has just asked the Supreme Court to allow the executive order to take effect while it happens, while the appeals happen. No decision yet. They have till April 4th. Apparently, the court set April 4th as the deadline for, I guess the pleadings on that to come in. So, but they don't seem to be in any rush to come up with anything and actually, it's not entirely clear to me that the Supreme Court wants to touch this issue, particularly if it looks like all the circuits are aligned. They tend to want to come into rule when there's more division on there, when there's not necessarily agreement between the 11 circuits in the U.S. So that's news that obviously people want to pay close attention to. The Guantanamo Bay was in the news a lot as far as being a detention center. Apparently, the last group of migrants have been moved out of there, and it is no longer being used as a detention center. There was the resumption of processing based on another court case of relatives of refugees. There was a lawsuit, and the administration lost, and they were ordered by the judge that they had to continue processing family members of refugees, even though they've shut down the refugee program. These are people who are outside the United States. Their refugee family members are here. The Trump administration said, well, we're not going to let them in because we're not admitting refugees anymore on there. And the court ordered that to happen. And the Department of State announced this week the resumption of processing for following to join beneficiaries. So that was some nice news. Again, the courts are the reason for that. And then I have just two more stories. One was that this one is really serious with Secretary of State Rubio basically saying that the Department of State's immigration authority is not covered by the Administrative Procedures Act. That sounds like a really obscure, boring thing. It's not. It means basically we can't sue the Department of State for violating due process rights and violating the rules requiring that are in place regarding how they issue rules and policies because it's foreign affairs. So that is likely to be cited in future for, as a defense by the Department of Justice when the State Department gets sued by people like us on there. So that will be, a judge is going to have to be ruling on that. And the most important immigration news story of the week is, of course, Prince Harry. Remember Prince Harry? He was there were all these people who were upset about his they said in his biography that he had used cocaine, and then all of a sudden there was this whole question about whether he should have ever been admitted to the U.S. And there was anyway, People magazine broke the story, of course, that his U.S. visa records were finally made public in a FOIA request on there, and that they revealed, this is according to People, I didn't actually look at the records, but according to People, they revealed that he did not receive special treatment when obtaining his visa. So that was the most important immigration news story, obviously, of the week. On there. So we have some questions, and if you have questions for us, you are you just in the comments for if you're in YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook or X or wherever you're watching us. If you have questions, we'll try and answer them. Roy Lawson, I see you. You've asked quite a few. I don't know whether you're sort of just commenting or actually some of these are questions that you want us to address. But Orlando Lovett asked in YouTube initially about are green card holders being targeted entry at U.S. airports. Hope we answered that question as best we can on there and give you some good tips on how to address that. Feeling Down had asked the question, families, green card holders, naturalization is coming. They're discussing leaving fear of injustice. So, that is something that this is sort of feels a little different than the first Trump administration is the number of people who have said, maybe we don't want to be here. And that is I believe that, I still believe that the immigration to the U.S., you're coming to the greatest country in the world, and that this too shall pass, was the famous saying on here. But if you're a green card holder and naturalization is coming, first of all, if you are a naturalized U.S. citizen, you have a lot of rights. And as far as we have seen, U.S. citizens are, that they're not messing around with them. But that is I don't know if you guys want to weigh in on it. But I would say, personally, I would probably say wait till the 2026 midterm elections, because I think at that time the balance of power will shift back with the Democrats probably picking. Right now it's virtually, I think the Democrats are 3 seats away from the majority in the House and 3 seats away from the majority in the Senate. So it's extremely close right now. Democrats had a lot of seats up for election in 2024, which is one of the things that made it very difficult for them to hang on to the Senate. Even if Harris had won, they probably would have lost the Senate. In the House, right now we're seeing a president whose approval ratings are sinking. They've already declined, I think, a good 9 points just since his inauguration on there. That's pretty fast for the honeymoon to be over. I think if the Democrats are successful in the next election and take back both houses of Congress, that there will be a lot of change, especially on immigration, where I think the president will have be constrained a lot more because Congress has the power of the purse, and he can be deprived of funds for doing a lot of the things that he's doing right now, which he's been enabled by a Congress who's not interested in stopping him. So that's the best I probably can tell you right now. We do global immigration work, so for people that are leaving the United States, you can call us. But I really don't want to see people leaving for that reason. If they, I think that people need to stick it out. Trump is not going to be here forever. Roy Lawson, who I know, we every once in a while we talk to each other on LinkedIn. So I had I mentioned on earlier about Japanese immigrants, and that was probably the most notorious use again of the Alien Enemies Act. I hope we don't see that. So you asked this question about what the judge can do if the order is being violated. So the most powerful thing that the judge can do is use his contempt authority. And he, first of all, he can order Tom Homan and order various administration officials to show up in his court. And they do actually have the U.S. Marshals, which can go and arrest somebody. And sometimes contempt of court. Stephen Bannon, for example, I forget how long he spent. He spent quite a while in jail for contempt of court for defying a judge. So that is and I'm not actually even sure that I don't think the president has pardon authority for people that are being held in contempt in jail. So that's a pretty serious power. It's obviously rarely used, but it might be the case here. I mentioned before the lawyers themselves can be referred by the judge over to the state bars for disciplinary action. That might not seem like a big deal. It's like, well, so what, but if a lawyer loses his law license because a judge referred him over to the state bar for disciplinary action, their career is basically over on that. And so, a lawyer who is doing, who's doing unethical things, that is their whole, they're working for somebody that's going to be out of office in 4 years, but they're essentially going to be dealing with the consequences for the rest of their careers on there. And there are other things that can be done, but but those are the main things. It would be would be the use of contempt actions. They can fine people as well. Personally, sometimes I think I don't see, it doesn't happen that often that government officials are held in contempt, but they are basically leaving Judge Boasberg with little choice here. I think he's going to have to. Unless they're somehow able to convince him that they did comply with his orders. But that's not seems the media doesn't seem to be reporting it that way. We had a question on the current status. So we talked about birthright citizenship. I guess I should mention just for Dr. Hussein that on this what's happened at this point with these 4 cases is they've all put on restraining orders. Prevents this from taking place, but nobody's actually issued a ruling on the order itself and saying that it's done. They just said basically when they issue a temporary restraining order, which is what happened, they will stop an action. They will stop something from taking effect, and basically they do that on the basis that they believe there's a significant likelihood that the party that's moving for the restraining order would win on the merits when that case gets to court. But we haven't actually had the trial yet. And that's probably what's going to happen in several months' time. Right now, the fight is over these restraining orders. And as I mentioned before, the Trump administration is trying to convince the judge that you should allow these orders to take effect until the hearing happens. The judges have basically said we're not, uniformly have said it. So they're going to the Supreme Court to overrule the 4 district court judges that have issued restraining orders, each one separately in this case. I don't think it's going to happen, but we will see. And on there, by the way, Jason Susser. Oh, Sasser.
Is that like
I looked at that and I saw Jason Susser. It's like, why is Jason Susser not on the screen? We have a lawyer named Jason Susser. This is Jason Sasser. Or one letter off. But this is about removal orders. Robby, you were in that world for a while. You worked in the immigration courts. Can removal orders be removed in I-130 cases after the I-130 is approved? If there was a removal order, do you recommend going to I-130 interviews with our attorney? So, and Jeanne, you may have some thoughts on this as well. But if there's a removal order, that removal order has to be taken care of. Otherwise, there's nothing you're going to really be able to do about the I-130 if you're in the country and you have a removal order. I mean, basically, you have to presumably get the case reopened, or you have to leave and you have to then get a waiver. I'm not sure what I'm missing on that, but once you have a removal order in place on there, you can't proceed with any visa applications domestically in the U.S., even an adjustment based on a marriage, unless you deal with that removal order. What am I missing?
I think that's.
I mean, it's there may be things that are going on as far as trying to. I mean, I think unfortunately, removal orders are going to be a lot harder to get reversed in the current political environment than they have been in the past, where you might have been able to get a case reopened and then potentially dismissed on there. But that one, and then I think that's Jason. I think it's going to be hard on there. As far as going to an I-130 interview, I mean, I think if somebody has a removal order and they show up in an I-130 interview, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to get removed. That's my big concern, and we really should be super cognizant of that possibility and have a conversation with a lawyer. But that we have seen like people who have removal orders, and and for one reason or another, they have been able to have permission to stay in the U.S. as long as they check in with ICE periodically. Some of those people have shown up at ICE and been arrested and put in detention and removed on there. So that's that's a serious problem for people with removal orders. And I think you need to be really cautious. Obviously, talk with your attorney about it, but that seems to be, just on the face of this question, a lot of risks that I think you have to have conversations with your lawyer about. Let's move on to me here. He wants to know about traveling out of the U.S. even on a business trip because he's on an H-1B with a clean history. He's worried about port experiences that are being posted online. And he follows it up saying he has a stamped U.S. visa in the passport. So there's no risk-free travel for non-immigrants. And this was not just, this is in any category. And I say risk-free, not necessarily meaning that it's high risk. It's just that the risk is more than zero on there. And that would be the main risk for most is that they would be put in secondary inspection. They could be subjected to a long interview, and the vast majority will get admitted, and they may miss their connections, and they will be obviously somewhat freaked out during the course of that process. But that's probably what will happen to most. But there's always, there is a chance for, almost anybody who is on a non-immigrant visa. So, the cautions I would give is, one is you have a stamped U.S. visa on there, so you don't have to deal with the consulate part of it anymore. But you should have a lot of documentation on you to verify everything that is that relates to your H-1B. And I'll push this back on here. And that would be maybe recent pay stubs. It would be documentation maybe from HR confirming your job duties are currently the following, and then basically listing them out and that they should be very consistent with the H-1B application that was filed. The pay stubs will show that you're still employed and also that you're still being paid the wage or higher than was listed on the labor condition application. You want to have the documentation that the company is still operating on there. So you may, want to make sure that maybe have some currently, I don't know, like current brochures and things like that. I'm not sure what you would have on that, but basically you should be prepared to document that nothing has changed in your situation, and that everything is exactly the same or pretty close to it for what was approved in that H-1B application before you travel. You ask, is it advisable to travel outside the U.S. even on a business trip? I mean, I guess some people don't really have a choice if they want to be employed and they're here for their H-1B job and they're not going to be employed. And so therefore there might not be a point of even being in the United States. They can't perform their job and they can't, and it requires international. But however, if I was talking to an employer, I would probably say if you have choices as far as who you're sending out on international trips to go to this conference or meeting with that client, I would say, is Zoom an option? Is other employees that are U.S. citizens, is that an option for sending instead on there? And those are the conversations I would probably be having with employers at this point. But, people are traveling and most people are coming in without problems. And even if they encounter problems, they're overcoming those problems. But I don't want to tell you that it's, that nothing's changed and everything is exactly the way it was before January 20th, because I do think that there is and it may calm down. We saw in 2017 a very similar phenomenon where in 2017 there was a lot of craziness that was happening at CBP with people that were coming into the country. And then we had travel bans, we had all kinds of other things, but it did seem to kind of settle down to more business as usual after a while. And I'm hoping that we see that. But for right now, we're cautioning against travel that's not necessary. And if you are traveling, you should be taking the kind of precautions I was just talking about, as well as the other things that we were talking about, which is like get the political stuff off your phones, or don't take your phone. You don't have to actually travel with the phone, believe it or not, or you can just have a flip phone on there. And be just prepared for the to deal with some of the stuff that we've been talking about. Okay. Have I heard any news on issues for domestic flights? No, because domestic flights, you're really just dealing with TSA. You're not dealing with CBP, except I think for domestic also includes like traveling back from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and there are some airports where there is sort of a heightened inspection of people that are here. But for the most part, if you're just traveling from Cleveland to Cincinnati on an airplane, for example, you're not going to. I have not heard about issues on domestic flights, except on May 1st. Real ID is coming into effect nationally. So that's only 45 days away, I guess. On there, Real ID, for those of you who don't know about it, is if you travel with a passport, you're fine. On here, if you're here on a visa and you're traveling with your passport, domestic travel is going to be fine for you. If you're, but in the U.S., most people present their driver's license when they get on an airplane for a domestic flight, and the driver's licenses themselves, if you have a driver's license, you may have noticed there's a little gold star somewhere on that driver's license. I know in Tennessee there's a little star. In fact, I have to go back and get mine extended on there. But that is you will need that to try if you're planning on traveling with the driver's license. You will need a Real ID driver's license in order to be able to get on a domestic flight after May 1st. So that's just an important date to know about. But hopefully by this point, most people have already gotten the documentation they need. Okay. It is, we're already 7 minutes past the hour. So I am going to dismiss the class for the evening. And I hope next week, maybe there'll be some good news to report. We should be back same time next week. And I want to thank people for coming in week after week. And we know that it's not the most pleasant subject to talk about as far as what's happening in the immigration system, but hopefully we provided you guys some useful news today. Tune in. I'm posting these days most of the developing news on my LinkedIn feed. If you're kind of like looking for on social media, probably where most of our stuff is being posted quickly. Elisa Taub is also, who's been on, she posts a lot on Blue Sky, and if you're on that platform, follow her. She's regularly posting about developments every day on immigration law. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.